The purpose of a backend application is to display data. Right now, in Listaroo, all of our data is living in this controller. That's not really the job of a controller. A controller should retrieve data from a database or an API, but the data itself shouldn't live right in the controller. We have these three different list items just smack dab right in this controller, and that's not really the way we would do things. Instead, controllers usually retrieve data through a model. All the logic used for getting the data lives in another file called a model. A model is a lot like objects in object-oriented programming. If you've done object-oriented programming in Ruby before, then you worked a lot with classes. This controller is a class, but it doesn't really resemble classes the way we think of them in object-oriented programming. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go into the app folder and then into the models folder. Now I'm going to create a new file called list.rb. Notice that this is list singular, not list plural. This is the only file name we've seen so far for lists where it was singular instead of plural. So the model is singular. Inside this file, we're going to create a new list class. And this is already looking more like object-oriented Ruby the way you probably learned it. And here, all of this data, oops, not that data, all of this data is going to live in here. This class, this model, this is going to be our way of retrieving data, the place the controller gets all of its data. So we need a way of getting the data in here and out into the controller. Just for testing purposes, and I would actually recommend doing this in real life if you don't have a database, I'm just going to have everything right here inside this model. Normally, your data, list 1, list 2, list 3, that would be coming from a database or an API from somewhere, but since we're just sort of starting out, I'm just going to put everything right in this file. Okay, so I'm going to store all of this list data inside a class variable called all. You've seen instance variables before that had just one at symbol. This one has two, and that makes it a class variable. The difference is with an instance variable, if this just had one at, then the way we would get it is by doing something like mylist equals list.new, and then we would have access to mylist.all. But when this is a class variable, now this would no longer work. Instead, .all is attached directly to the list class itself in list.all. This is nice because it gives us a way of every single list in our application sort of being able to share the same data. This list.all, as you can see, it's going to be an array that contains every single list. In order to be able to access this variable from outside the class, well, with an instance variable, we would have used attr accessor all, but this is a class variable, so instead we're going to use catter accessor all. This is a Rails specific thing where, as you might guess, the C stands for class. So this is letting us access a class attribute, a class variable. Now, all I need to do in order to be able to access these lists is go back to the list controller and just type list.all. If this worked successfully, then when I refresh this page, we should see everything we saw before, and there it is. Just to prove that this information is coming from the model now, I'm going to add an additional list item, list 4, and there it is. We can see it showing up there. So this is a start in the direction where your Rails app is going to end up. By the time Rails app is all finished and polished and everything, all of your list data is going to be living in a database and you're going to be accessing it through a model. We've created the model, we don't have the database yet, but it's a move in the right direction. You can see how much cleaner this makes the controller. It's already much smaller. A saying among Rails developers is that Rails developers like fat models and skinny controllers. That is, anything that's sort of cluttering up a controller should probably go into a model. I'm going to save this commit as moving lists to their own class.